السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Hi everyone. Congratulations to be joined to the Faculty of Medicine, Mansoura University. It is a great honor. You will be great doctors, inshallah. You will have your first step by this week in the Faculty of Medicine to be doctors. I'm Dr. Shireen Samir, Associate Professor of Medical Physiology. I'll be with you in your first step in the first lecture of physiology. We must know something about the cell in this week, so you will have the cell structure in histology, and you must have knowledge about its function and the transport across this cell in physiology. So our objective is to know the organization of cell membrane, the function of cell membrane, and also how molecules transport through the cell membrane. When you revise your knowledge from high school, you know that our body consists of many systems. This system consists of every system consists of the gastrointestinal system consists of organs, and each organ consists of tissue, and each tissue consists of cells. And these cells consist of some organelles and molecules and then atoms. So we have the cell is the unit. As a unit, it is the structural and functional unit of our body. So what about the cell membrane, or what we call it plasma membrane? This is the cell. This cell consists of many organelles inside: nucleus, nuclear membrane, mitochondria, lysosome, Golgi, centrioles, cytoplasm, and all these organelles will be enveloped by certain membrane called the plasma membrane or cell membrane. These organelles will be discussed in details in histology. So what about the cell membrane? The cell membrane, it is very thin, elastic, semi-permeable membrane that envelop or surround the cell. What we mean about semi-permeable? Semi-permeable means that it allows substance to pass and prevent others. So not allow all substance, so I can call it semi-permeable membrane. It is about 7.5 nanometer in thickness, or what we call it 75 angstrom in thickness. What are the components of cell membrane? So cell membrane, thin, very thin, elastic, semi-permeable. It is about 7.5 nanometer in thickness. It consists of 3 components: lipid, protein, and carbohydrate. A lipid around 42%, the protein 55%, the carbohydrate is 3%. This composition and this percentage, you will be asked about it in histology. So if a question comes in your exam about the structure or the composition or percentage of composition, so you can answer from a histology lecture. But if you asked about the function, so you must reply from the physiology lecture. So we have lipid, protein, and carbohydrate. What about a lipid? A lipid consists of the basic structure of cell membrane. As you see, this is the basic structure. We have lipid bilayer, 2 layers of a lipid, consist mainly of a phospholipid and in between we have some cholesterol, and attached to it some carbohydrate called glycolipid. So mainly we have the phospholipid. This phospholipid is consist of head and tail. Head and tail. الhead, it is phosphate and it like water, hydrophilic, so it face outside الwater extracellular fluid والinside intracellular fluid. But the tail, it is lipid in structure, so it is hydrophobic, يعني not like water, so it face each other. So again, الليبيد bilayer أو الفوسفوليبيد bilayer consists of head of phosphate, it is hydrophilic, and الليبيد tail اللي هو الهيدروفوبيك. So الهيدروفوبيك that doesn't like الwater face each other، واللي like الووتر الهيدروفيليك الفوسفيت هيد face الانتراسيلولار فلويد اللي هو السيتوبلازم والاكسترا سيلولار فلويد. What about the proteins? The proteins inside the cell membrane, two types, either integral or I can call it intrinsic protein. الانتجرال او الانترنسك ده can transmit all thickness of الممبرين, so I can call it transmembrane. يبقى we have three names للsame structure: transmembrane or integral or intrinsic. وده bind to the hydrophobic, here they bind للhydrophobic tail of الphospholipid. What about the peripheral? The other type of protein is peripheral protein. This is the peripheral protein. والperipheral or extrinsic protein either bind to the hydrophilic phosphate or the integral protein. يبقى again الانتجرال بروتين ده اللي بايند ليه الانسايد ستراكشر بتاع الفوسفوليبيد اللي هو الليبيد لتيل. But peripheral or extrinsic either bind to the integral or bind to the phosphate head بتاع الفوسفوليبيد. What are the function of البروتينز؟ البروتينز mainly الانتجرال بروتين او الترانسممبرين بروتين can act as a channel. This channel can pass a molecule from one side to the other side because it expands throughout the thickness بتاع السيل membrane. And it is protein, so can pass a water soluble molecule through it. يعني we know that a lipid didn't like water, so a lipid can pass only lipid soluble. But here the protein can pass a water soluble. Or carrier, it can act as a carrier. والcarrier here can carry a molecule from one side and through it to the other side, also a water soluble molecule. Or pump, what is the difference between the carrier and pump? The carrier can carry a molecule without needing energy, but the pump will need energy. Here it carry molecules but spend energy to pass it to the other side. Or it can act as receptors, and these receptors which are present in the cell membrane are protein in nature, maybe integral or maybe a peripheral extrinsic. It binds to a chemical substance or a hormone to make changes inside a cell, which will be the action or the effect of this chemical substance. So we have either channel, a protein, integral protein, either channel, either or carrier or receptor or pump. What about the third component of cell membrane? It is carbohydrate, and this carbohydrate either bind to the protein, so-called glycoprotein, or bind to the lipid, so-called glycolipid. يبقى here bind to the lipid glycolipid, or bind to protein called the glycoprotein, and to both glycoprotein and the glycolipid called the glycocalyx. يبقى الجلايكوكاليكس it is formed of glycoprotein and glycolipid. It is present on the outer surface of a cell membrane. It can act as attachment matrix for cells. It attaches cells to each other. So we can conclude the function of cell membrane from these changes inside and outside the cell. So this cell membrane is separated between the cytoplasm inside the cell and the extracellular fluid outside the cell. So it will keep each component of this compartment constant. يعني الانتراcellular compartment, the component of it will be constant, and the extracellular will be constant due to presence of cell membrane that separate between these two compartments. Also, it maintains the cell internal environment. Each component inside the cell, either pH, either ions present, or anything أو التون اللي هو البريشر inside the cell, it will be kept constant due to presence of cell membrane. Also, it helps to transport the molecules in and outside the cell, and we will discuss these ways of transport, and to control the ion distribution between cytoplasm and extracellular. I told you high sodium outside, low potassium, and low sodium and high potassium inside. So this ion distribution will be controlled and maintained by the cell membrane. Also, the protein component in the cell membrane will act as receptors for hormones and the chemical transmitter. When the thyroid hormone will be released or adrenaline will be released inside your blood, it will act on cells. How it can act? By binding the two receptors in these cells and regulates certain signal to perform its function. So these receptors for these hormones will be a protein structure inside the cell membrane. Also, it acts as channels and carriers for transport. We will discuss it today in this lecture. And also, it generates membrane potential. What is the meaning of membrane potential? It means that the electricity inside and outside the cell membrane, it is not the same. Outside and inside the cell membrane, we will have different electricity. Inside will be negative than the outside, so it carry a potential. It will carry potential. This potential called membrane potential, and this membrane potential play a very important role to perform action potential أو to make the tissue excitable and respond to any stimulus. So when my muscles contract or shorten, this contraction is due to in the muscle cells are excitable. Tissue يعني has membrane potential. You will have this later on in physiology lectures, resting membrane potential with action potential, to know about this very well. What about the transport through cell membrane? We have three ways of transport: either diffusion or passive transport, active transport, and vesicular transport. When we discuss first the passive transport, or what we call it diffusion, what it meant? It meant that it is the movement of substance across a cell membrane down an electrochemical gradient. So when a molecule passes through cell membrane from high concentration to low concentration, it is passive transport or diffusion. يبقى الباسج أو movement of a substance across the cell membrane from a high to low concentration called down its electrochemical gradient. Down electrochemical gradient means down the concentration gradient. So this called passive transport or diffusion. It is divided into simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis for water only. A simple diffusion, as you can see, it can pass through lipid bilayer or pass through protein integral protein channel. But the facilitated need carrier. It is the composition of carrier. But in both, it transmits from high concentration to low concentration. So when I pass from high concentration to low concentration, I didn't need energy, I didn't need power to push me because I go by my concentration to the other side. What about a simple diffusion? It is the movement of substance across a cell membrane down an electrochemical gradient. It is the same definition as passive transport, but here we add by simple movement without binding to carrier. يبقى الباسيف transport as a whole, it is passage substance from high concentration to low concentration or down an electrochemical gradient. When I speak about the simple, so I add by simple diffusion, not need carrier. It can pass lipid, a lipid soluble can pass through lipid bilayer. والwater soluble can pass through channels. يبقى we have small water soluble can pass through الwatery protein channel, والlipid soluble molecule pass through lipid bilayer. Give me an example. It is like the passage of oxygen with CO2 through cell membrane. Oxygen with CO2 when pass through cell membrane, it is lipid soluble. The gas is lipid soluble, so it can diffuse through lipid bilayer or lipid interstices. This is the simple diffusion. It can pass easily through a lipid bilayer as an oxygen with CO2 or pass through channels like sodium or potassium from a high concentration to low concentration without need of energy, without need of carrier, without need of anything. So the simple diffusion characterized by, and this is a question. If I can give you a question about define the simple diffusion and give me characteristics of it with examples. Characterized by, it occurred down the electrochemical gradient. It occurred down the electrochemical gradient, يعني from high to low concentration. It is passive, so not need any energy. It passed by its concentration gradient, so not need any energy, external energy. Also, it didn't need any carrier. So, as long as the difference of concentration increase, the transport will be increase here. So here we will have a line. This is the line of a simple diffusion. A blue line, it is a simple diffusion. As long as the concentration gradient increase, so the transport through cell membrane will be increased in simple diffusion. So we call it not saturable, not rate limited. What is the meaning of this? In facilitated diffusion need carrier. So when need carrier, when here with increase the concentration gradient, it bind to carrier. So increase bind to carrier till the carrier availability or a number of carrier will be decreased so the number bind to carrier will be decreased. Then all carriers will be saturated. All carriers bind to molecules. So any more molecules can bind? No. I can't carry more molecules than my capacity. So according to the number of carrier and their capacity, it will occur saturation and a stoppage of transport at this level. There is no more transport. Again, when we have a lift in our building, and this lift can carry only 3. So when there will be one waiting for this lift, can pass in this lift. When there will be 2, yes, can enter the lift. When 3, can enter the lift. But when we have 5, so I can't. The lift will be saturated. It carries its capacity. When we have 10 waiting for the lift and we have only one lift, so when this lift is saturated, it can't carry more than this. So this is the carrier mediated diffusion. الcarrier mediated أو facilitated accordingly الcarrier saturation, it will be saturable, the transport will be saturable. And rate limiting means إنه rate limiting means إن I will reach certain rate and I can't overcome this rate by my availability of the carrier and my saturation of the carrier. But what about simple diffusion? It didn't need any carrier, so it is not rate limited. It is according to the concentration gradient only. As the concentration gradient increased, it will increase. There is no it is linear هنا. What about the osmosis or simple diffusion of water? The osmosis or diffusion of water, it is like simple diffusion exactly, but only for water. The water diffuses through lipid bilayer. I told you that the water soluble substance passes through protein channels. But here, the water can pass through protein channel, can pass through lipid bilayer, anything. Why? Why the water can pass through lipid bilayer? Because it is a small size and has very kinetic energy. It passes very rapidly. So it moves from a high to low concentration of water like bullets. زي طلقات الرصاص, like bullets. So the passage of water from a high concentration to low concentration, it can pass through the channels or pass through lipid bilayer due to its small molecular weight and high kinetic energy. Again, but what about the facilitated? The facilitated diffusion, it is the same definition of passive, but we add carrier. يبقى definition of passive diffusion اللي هو it is the diffusion of substance across the cell membrane down للelectrochemical gradient. It is the same اهو, the same definition. But here needs the presence of carrier protein or what we call it carrier mediated diffusion. يبقى the characteristics of this diffusion أو transport is carrier mediated. Give me an example. The example of carrier mediated is transport of glucose بالglucose transporter. طب what are the characteristics? It occurs down the electrochemical gradient or concentration gradient. It is passive. It doesn't need energy. It carries substance from a high to low concentration, so not need energy. Not need energy, but require a transport carrier. يبقى الجلوكوز here more than outside, but need carrier to carry it because there is no protein channels can acquire this glucose molecule. فنيد special carrier to carry it, but this carrier not spend energy because it carries substance من الهاي للlow concentration. So when we need carrier, So I can judge that it is rate limited and saturable. Rate limited and saturable according للavailability of the carrier. Availability of the carrier, available number of carrier. If we have more carrier, so we have more transport. If we have less carrier, so we have less transport. So it is carrier mediated, means saturable and rate limited. What about the active transport? The active transport means the movement, it is the opposite of the diffusion or passive. It means the movement of a substance across the cell membrane against the concentration gradient or electrochemical gradient. Here we pass the molecule from low concentration to high concentration using certain carrier and need external energy. So when we pass the molecule against the electrochemical, we need energy. So what about the character? It is against the electrochemical gradient. It is active. Active means you need energy. Active means you need energy. We do something. We do some effort. It requires the presence of carrier protein. يبقى I need carrier, and this carrier need energy to transport against the electrochemical. So when we need the carrier, so it has saturation, and what we call it stereospecificity, means each carrier is specifically certain molecules only, not to all molecules. We have two types of active transport, either primary active transport or secondary active transport. What is the difference? What is the most distinguishing character that differentiate the primary from secondary? Is the energy, the source of energy. The energy in primary active coming from ATP directly, but in secondary it coming from the energy stored in sodium concentration gradient. Energy stored in sodium concentration gradient, you must recall it. In primary active transport, in all these primary active transport examples, we destroy the ATP to give us the energy to pass these molecules. We have sodium potassium ATPase pump, calcium ATPase, we call the ATPase means destroy the ATP, ATPase. So this ATPase we can call it pump. يبقى البump it is carrier that destroy the ATP or use the energy. الكارير when using energy أو need energy أو destroy ATP we can call it pump. الصوديوم potassium ATPase pump it is present in all cell membrane. It all the time keeps that sodium inside less than outside. It make sodium getting out, so we have outside the cell high sodium level, and inside the cell we have high potassium level. For all the time we have sodium potassium pump that allows sodium all the time to be outside the cell more than inside, and the potassium inside more than outside. الكالسيوم ATPase pump the present in cell muscle, present in cell membranes and in sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscles. فالكالسيوم ATPase ده maintain الانتراcellular calcium low, because if the calcium inside the muscle cell present high, it will cause contraction without relaxation, so we will suffer from tetany. So we must have less calcium inside the cell, and this calcium ATPase will serve to do this. Potassium hydrogen ATPase أو proton pump, this present inside the stomach and in kidney, and this can maintain the hydrogen expelled inside the lumen to be released في اليومن, والpotassium inside the cell. All this movement of potassium and hydrogen and calcium, sodium, potassium will occur against the concentration gradient. Means I threw substance against the concentration gradient from low to high concentration. يعني when the sodium getting out the cell, it is against the concentration because the concentration of sodium outside more than inside. Understanding this? What about the body fluids? The body fluids, we will have fluid either inside the cell or outside the cell. Inside the cell, we will have cytoplasm. And this cytoplasm inside the cells of the body will consist mainly of potassium more than sodium. So we will have higher potassium and less sodium. Higher potassium and less sodium. It is different from the extracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid present in what? Present in plasma and blood. Present in between the cells. What we call it interstitial. So this interstitial fluid circulate in spaces between the cells. يبقى الانترستيشيال ده الفلويد in between the cell. We will have in blood. Also, we will have in some cavities in our body, like the cavity of a joint, like an eye. So, this called transcellular, and all these fluid are outside the cell, so it is extracellular. It is different from inside the cell, yes. In what? The extracellular consists of more sodium than potassium. يبقى in extracellular, we will have high sodium. In intracellular, we will have low sodium and high potassium. The potassium outside is less than inside. With sodium outside is more than inside. So you must know this because I can give you a question about this. يبقى main characteristic of extracellular fluid is and I give you more choices. That choice either high sodium or low potassium. We'll discuss this. Here we have inside the cell intracellular fluid, or what we call it cytoplasm. Also we have outside the cell extracellular fluid. I must give you certain knowledge, you must recall it well. The intracellular fluid normally consists of high potassium and low sodium. While extracellular consists of high sodium and low potassium. يبقى again, the potassium mainly inside the cell higher than outside. With sodium higher outside, higher than inside. The normal composition. And a cell membrane present to separate the extra from the intracellular and keep the extracellular with its high sodium constant and keep the intracellular with its high potassium constant. So here inside the cell membrane we have the potassium 140 milli equivalent with sodium 14 milli equivalent, so we have higher potassium inside the cell. But outside we have a sodium هو اللي higher 140 milli equivalent per liter والpotassium 4 milli equivalent, so sodium here higher والpotassium here higher. Normally بالsimple diffusion والpresence of a protein channel cell membrane, the sodium tend to get in والpotassium tend to get out by simple diffusion. But if we continue to get in the sodium والpotassium get out by simple diffusion, so it will continue till the sodium inside become equal outside والpotassium برضو will be equalized, and this will destroy the potential composition that God make it. So in order to keep this composition constant, the presence of sodium potassium ATP base pump in all cell membrane is mandatory. So this sodium potassium ATP base pump will destroy ATP to ADP and have energy helping البوتاسيوم that come out بالsimple diffusion to get in again. with sodium يبقى helping البوتاسيوم that come out to get in again, and the sodium that get in بالsimple diffusion to come out again and keep the composition constant. Again. We have normally sodium higher outside than inside, and potassium higher inside than outside. This is the normal composition. But by presence of protein channel in cell membrane, it can allow sodium to pass in by simple diffusion by its concentration gradient. والpotassium also can come out by its concentration gradient from الهاي للlow, والsodium from الهاي للlow. So sodium by this simple diffusion can increase inside, والpotassium by simple diffusion can increase outside and destroy in natural composition of intracellular and extracellular fluid. So a sodium potassium pump will correct this and retain the normal composition by destroying ATP and giving energy to help the potassium get in again against the concentration gradient. Some potassium that get out will get in against the high concentration gradient. With sodium can get out again against the high concentration gradient by primary active transport. This primary active transport helps sodium to get out والpotassium to get in against the concentration gradient utilizing the ATP. And this primary active keep the high sodium outside with high potassium inside. This high sodium outside will help us to do another transport. We have also in some cells what we call it is sodium glucose co-transport. Normally we have high glucose in our cell, and when I eat and have glucose in blood outside, I want it to enter inside the cell. How it can enter? We have here low glucose. Even when I eat my food, yes, when I eat my diet, 120 or 80 milligram glucose, it is less than inside the cell. And I want this glucose coming from low to enter inside the cell to be destroyed. فالباسج من اللو للهاي ده active transport. So الجلوكوز can bind to specific carrier which allow الصوديوم والجلوكوز bind to the same carrier and pass in the same direction inside the cell. Using what energy? Using the energy اللي stored في الهاي sodium concentration gradient. Here, the primary active transport helps sodium to come out again and keep a high concentration gradient. This high concentration gradient gives energy to sodium to pass easily, simply from a high to low concentration, and with it, it can carry glucose against the concentration gradient. يبقى here we have active transport for glucose but not for sodium. Sodium passage by its concentration gradient carrying glucose against the concentration gradient with it. So this glucose transmitted by secondary active transport. Why secondary active transport? Because it depends on the primary active here. When this primary active transport not occur, so I can't have high sodium concentration gradient here, so a transport the sodium glucose will be blocked. But when the primary active transport occur, so it keep high sodium outside, giving energy to make sodium pass with the glucose and carry glucose with it. So this secondary is dependent on primary. And here the primary take energy from the ATP, but here there is no ATP, the energy coming from the sodium concentration gradient. I hope you understand this, it is very important. So example of secondary active transport, as we see sodium glucose co-transport, and it occurs in cell membrane, transport sodium and glucose inside the cell. Co-transport means in the same direction, but exchange means in the opposite direction. So sodium calcium exchange, we have sodium will enter the cell by concentration gradient, while calcium will go out in the opposite direction. So here we have the calcium go uphill from a low intracellular to high extracellular calcium. The calcium present outside the cell more than inside. But when in heart I wanted calcium or في muscle, when I want the calcium to get outside, especially in heart, when I want the calcium to go outside and help relaxation of the muscle, the sodium calcium exchanger will act. فالصوديوم primary active will help the sodium to go outside and create high sodium concentration. So the high sodium concentration outside will go in, while calcium will go out. When we compare simple with facilitators with active, and it can come in question as compare. For simple, when we talk about the electrochemical, السمبل داون هيل الالكتروكيميكال والفاسيليتيتد داون هيل but الاكتف اب هيل or against the concentration gradient. Here we didn't need energy when we coming with the concentration, but we need energy in active. الريت والsaturation والcarrier والcompetition, all these not present in simple diffusion. But in facilitated وactive we have carrier. يبقى need carrier, so rate limited, saturable, show competition, any carrier means the competition of molecule on this carrier means a saturation of this carrier means that it will reach rate limit when the carrier is saturated. What about the last transport method اللي هو الفيزيكولار؟ الفيزيكولار it is the way أو الميكانيزم by which a large sized substance can cross a cell membrane. Large sized like a protein. We have no channels, no carrier can carry a protein. So the proteins need special transport اللي هو الفيزيكولار. We have either endocytosis يعني transport للextracellular material entrapped or invaginated through cell membrane to inside like the bacteria, and this when I give this is the bacteria أو الفاجوسيتوزيس أو البينوسيتوزيس or what else. So this can done by invagination the cell membrane and make it as phagosome inside. When it occurs in solid particle called phagocytosis, when it occurs in fluid called penocytosis, and also we have receptor mediated. What else we have? Endocytosis. يبقى الانdocytosis, البينوسيتوزيس one of endocytosis, الphagocytosis one of endocytosis, and the carriage large molecule this expend energy. يبقى this is active and use energy. The other type of vesicular is exocytosis, and it is the opposite. It is the intracellular material is trapped in vesicle, and this vesicle will fuse to the cell membrane to expel or release the content للextracellular. also active we need energy. يبقى ال vesicular transport is active we need energy. Here as the release of hormone or digestive enzyme أو synaptic transmitter any substance that formed inside اهي الendoplasmic reticulum والGolgi apparatus will form vesicle, and this vesicle will fuse with the cell membrane to expel substance outside a cell. This called exocytosis. I hope you understand this well. Thank you. Again, know well the transport, ways, characters, examples, and the function of cell membrane. You must add it in your lecture notes. The function of cell membrane will function of integral protein will glycocalyx. Thank you.